Houston, we have a problem.
This is Bryce Massengill. This is H-Town. And this is the Liberty Root Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Liberty Root Podcast on the 17th day of January 2018. We're going to do something a little bit different on today's podcast because for the past week I've been a little bit under the weather, so I haven't been able to prepare like I normally would for the podcast. So today we're going to take our 5 most popular heroes in history that we've done, and we're just going to kind of play them on a loop for you guys to enjoy this evening. So it's going to be kind of a relaxing evening here on the podcast, and I hope you enjoy. In 1720, a farm was purchased by John Adams Sr. in Braintree, Massachusetts. He was only 29. Since childhood, he always worked hard to make a living by carrying many different jobs. He was a cobbler, a shoemaker, and now he wanted to try his hand in farming. Being outdoors and working with the earth is something he took great pride in. He saw the farm as something as being a provider for his family, and just as important, being a provider for the local townspeople. He was known to the locals as being a kind, humble, and he would give the shirt off his back to anyone. He loved talking and getting to know people on a real personal level. He loved their stories and their personalities. He had a great talent of remembering names. He thought if I could only hold on to their names the next time I see them, they will be delighted with happiness that I took pride in remembering it. John Adams Sr. was a religious man and believed that he wouldn't have the joyous life he did if it wasn't for his God. He and his wife Susanna always referred to their work as being the Lord's work, and that everything that they have was all due because of their mighty Creator. John Adams Sr. became a deacon in their church, and from that moment on, he was referred to only as Deacon John. John Sr. was a great communicator, but more importantly, he was a great listener. The townspeople always knew who to go to if they needed someone to talk to, and John Sr. was always willing to listen. He loved his wife Susanna more than life itself, and together they would have 9 children. Of the 9 children, one seemed to be a spitting image of John himself, and that was his own son, John. John, from a very young age, was smart, compassionate, and would talk your ear off at any chance that you would give him. You could always find John Jr. besides a candle with a book in his hand. He loved to read and learn about anything and everything. He could interpret the stories of which he read in a way that would make you feel as though you were there yourself. His father, John Sr., knew that his son could be anything he wanted. John Sr., however, so badly wanted his son to become a preacher because of his commanding voice and sense of knowledge of the Bible. John Jr., though, had no ambitions of becoming a preacher. Instead, John wanted to be a lawyer. He didn't want to let his father down by not becoming a great preacher, but to his surprise, when he approached his father with the news of wanting to become a lawyer, John Sr. lit up and said, "I'm proud of you, my son." John Sr. didn't show any hostility to the fact that his son chose a different route, even though in the back of his head, he was probably slightly disappointed. John Sr. told his son that I will do anything in my power to help you to achieve your goal. And that's exactly what he did. When John Jr. got accepted into Harvard Law School in 1751, his father sold off 10 acres of their land to help pay for his education. John Jr. loved and respected his father so much before this wonderful gift was given, but now said, I truly could never love him more. John Sr. supported his son through all of his college days, sending him letters to show how proud of him he was, and reminding him that no dream is too big. John Jr. graduated college and landed his first job as being the lawyer. The first case that John was dealt and put in front of him, he lost. He felt helpless and discouraged, but after a quick uplifting visit with his father, he had the courage to fight on. In May of 1761, John Jr. received devastating news that his father was deathly ill, and on May 25th, 1761, his father had passed away from influenza. John Jr. was crushed after the passing of his father, but from that point on, everyone that he ran into, he would tell the wonderful stories about his father to anyone who would listen. John Jr. wanted to keep his father's memory alive, so he bought the 53-acre farm after his mother remarried. John Jr. devoted his whole life to making his father proud and fighting for liberty. John Adams Jr. would go on to become an American patriot, founding father, and the second president of the United States. He said he achieved such great heights with his steadfast studies, his forgiving God, and the love of his father. He promised to instill the traits that his father possessed onto his own children, and that's exactly what he did. John Adams Jr. raised, loved, and encouraged his son, John Quincy Adams, who then went on to become an American statesman, United States Senator, member of the House of Representatives, and the 6th President of the United States. All this just goes to show that a father's love unlocks all sorts of potential. The year was 1775, and the notion of independence was still just a dream that danced in the heads of those involved in the Second Continental Congress. The pursuit of liberty and independent colonies was, at this point, something that most wanted, but the way of going about it, some still held much reservation. Debate in the State House was convening every day, sometimes in upwards of 12 hours in one sitting. Some debated over whether to part from Britain rule and gain independency, and others debated in favor of reconciling their differences to become truly one entity. However, one man held no reservations about the feelings with this country. Thomas Paine, Brit by birth, he was a gifted writer, philosopher, political theorist, and a revolutionary. Paine migrated from England in 1774 with the help of his friend Benjamin Franklin. His arrival into the colony seemed almost planned, almost like a godsend. He arrived just in time to be a part of the American Revolution, and the part that he would play would be a crucial and a very moving one. For years, Paine had viewed the story of America playing out, but from a British perspective. He saw a fire burning in a land of courageousness, rightfulness, and a course charted for independence. He knew that fighting for something greater than himself was definitely worth every bit of the fight. Soon after arriving in America, he began to put ink to paper. He wanted to be able to express his strong opinions on the importance of independency. He didn't want his words to just be splotches on paper. He wanted it to spread like fire across the colonies, to be a piece of discussion in every tavern, shop, and eventually, unbeknownst to him, a crucial point of discussion in the Second Continental Congress. In his pamphlet, he showed just how crucial it was for America to break free from oppressive Britain and to adopt its own independency, standing firm within the liberties provided by its people and not a ruler. It seemed as though once Paine dotted his last I and he crossed his last T, the fire in which he hoped would spread, in fact did. Within just a few days, it seemed as though everyone was talking about Paine's pamphlet. Even local newspapers copied it on the front page of their editions. People were relieved that finally someone with their thoughts was able to interpret it in writing. The impact of Thomas Paine's common sense is known today to be a huge factor in why some of the delegates changed their minds and decided that freedom and independency was not only right, but it was just. Common sense was referenced immensely during the congressional meetings, and it played a tremendous role in the influence on our independence. Paine, being of British descent, still saw the power, importance, meaning, and the great promise of a free and liberated America. America was now Paine's new home, his beautiful, prideful, and now independent country. The home from which he came in England, it granted him a role in society, and even a certain livelihood, but it didn't grant him freedom. He understood the importance of the latter. To him, you see, if the American experiment would have failed, even after his migration to America, I'm sure the words that would still be uttered from pain today would still remain the same. Give me liberty, or give me death. It was just another morning for Doris Miller. He arose from bed just before 6 a.m. He put on his perfectly pressed Navy uniform, slipped on his shiny leather shoes, adjusted his sailor's cap, and threaded his scarf through the collar of his shirt, finishing with a perfectly tied bow that hit on the sternum of his chest. The date was December 7, 1941. Doris Miller, or Dory, as he would later become known, was born October 12, 1919 in Waco, Texas. He was the third of 4 sons. Miller managed to keep a calm mind and a soft spirit even in the midst of being a black child in a segregated America. He was a very hard worker. He did more than his fair share of working on the family farm. He helped clean the home, he did the laundry, and completed the daily chores that goes along with maintaining a farm. Even though Doris was a student of color, he excelled athletically and earned a starting role as fullback on his high school football team. His family struggled financially, so at the age of 17 he dropped out of school and enlisted with the United States Navy. He thought it would be great to serve his country, travel the world, and send money to his parents whenever possible. Even in the military, people of color were not treated as equal among the white sailors. They couldn't hold such prestigious positions such as pilot or combat operations. They took maintenance, cleaning, and cooking type jobs. Doris held all different sorts of lower tier type jobs after enlistment and was eventually elevated to cook 3rd class and appointed to the USS West Virginia. Doris took pride in what he did. He was happy to settle. He wouldn't get down on himself for not being able to hold positions of higher rank. It was difficult at times to work on a ship with him being over 200 pounds and standing at 6 feet 3 inches tall, but he didn't let it get to him. He maintained a joyous attitude, and a smile was always plastered on his face. He enjoyed being in the kitchen, crafting, experimenting with new meal creations. He often would reminisce about being home making home-cooked meals for his family back at the farm. The routine stayed the same day in and day out, but on December 7, 1941, that routine would be drastically different. Doris took one last look in the mirror to make sure his uniform was up to code and headed out the door around 6 a.m. He would arrive to the kitchen shortly after. His morning began like all others, preparing the food that was made up the evening before. At around 6:45, the dining hall was flooded with sailors eating their morning breakfast. And after breakfast, each morning Doris would make his way to the mess hall and gather laundry. He then arrived at the laundry room and began washing. Over the hum of the washer, a loud explosion occurred, and the vessel shook violently. Doris had to quickly balance his weight to avoid falling down, and as Doris gained his footing, this is what he heard. Doris quickly made his way from below deck to the ship's bridge and saw a devastating sight. He saw the Japanese fighter planes attacking the naval forces, and everything in sight quickly becoming engulfed in flames. He ran to the ship's anti-aircraft station only to find it shattered and destroyed by a Japanese torpedo. Doris quickly looked for anything he could do to help. He saw many of his fellow Navy men severely injured. He knew he must get them to safety for them to have any chance at survival. So Doris carried 2 at a time through the oil and flame-filled waters to medical stations. He went back and forth, saving as many lives as he could. On one trip, he saw that the captain of the ship was injured. Doris tried to save him, but his efforts came up short. When Doris believed that he helped all that he could, he noticed an unattended 50 caliber anti-aircraft gun and began firing at the Japanese warplane. Although he had no previous training in operating the weapon, he managed to take down 4 Japanese aircraft. Once Miller ran out of ammunition, he was ordered to abandon ship. After the raid was over, the damage was devastating. 6 battleships sunk, 188 aircraft destroyed, and 2,403 brave men and women lost their lives that day. But if it wasn't for the heroism of Doris Miller, many more would have been lost. One commander of the ship later stated, "I saw no color that day, and I shall see no color going forward." On May 27, 1942, Admiral Chester Nimitz honored Doris Miller with the Navy Cross Award, and he was promoted to a first class. The Navy Cross Award is one of the highest honors given by the Navy. Doris gained the reputation and the name as the Hero Cook, and in the spring of 1943, Doris put the apron on once again, this time on the vessel Linscomb Bay. But sadly, at 5:10 a.m. on November 24th, the ship was hit by a single torpedo fired from a Japanese submarine. The torpedo was carrying a bomb. After it exploded, the ship sank within minutes. Only 242 men survived the attack, and unfortunately, Doris Miller wasn't one of them. In addition to receiving the Navy Cross Award, Miller received the Purple Heart, the American Defense Service Medal, the Pacific Campaign Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. And in 1973, the Knox-class frigate was named the USS Miller. A man who wanted to simply provide for his family ended up being an American patriot and one of the many heroes who proudly served their country. A heart of gold is always gold, regardless of skin color. Will I ever be able to write something great? I hope so. So very much. Because writing allows me to record everything. My thoughts, ideals, and fantasies. This is what Anne Frank wrote in her diary during World War II. And after the war, her diary was turned into a book. The book has become so famous that those words are now painted on the walls of the school that she went to. And only a year after making this diary entry, Anne Frank was killed. Anne was Jewish, and because of that, her life was taken from her. She was only 15 years old. Anne Frank began keeping a diary on her 13th birthday. Most of the entries came during her 2 years in hiding. Anne Frank was born June 12, 1929, and her sister Margot is 3 years older. Her mother Edith was a stay-at-home mother, and her father Otto worked in a bank. They lived together in Frankfurt, Germany. Life was good in Germany. Anne and Margot had many other Jewish friends that they would play with. All seemed to be well. But that would all change in 1933 with the rise of the anti-Semitic party, also commonly known as the Nazi Germans. Their leader was a man named Adolf Hitler. They hated the Jews. At the time, Germany was a poor country, and Hitler promised the people wealth and glory. He wanted the Germans to be united under one leader because they were being threatened by foreign enemies. And to the Nazis, the Jews are Germany's greatest enemy. Hitler had a way of convincing little by little the German people. They started, believing him. The Nazis didn't waste any time. As soon as they rose to power, they went straight to work. They started arresting anyone who had ideas different than their own. They would put them in prison camps and burnt their belongings. Edith and Otto began to worry for their children's safety, so they uprooted and they moved to the Netherlands. And when Anne was 5, Amsterdam was her new home. But Hitler's strength was growing like wildfire. and on May 10th, 1940, the Nazis crossed into the Netherlands. The advance into the Netherlands was so powerful that they completely occupied it in only 5 days. The Nazis now had total control of the Netherlands. What they did in Germany, they could now do in the Netherlands. And that's exactly what they did. When Anne turned 13, she received a diary. She had always wanted one, and as soon as she got it, she began writing in it. Her diary would become her new best friend. Only 3 weeks after receiving her diary, though, Anne and her family were forced into hiding. When on one Sunday afternoon, the postman dropped off a letter for Anne's sister, Margot. The letter stated that she needed to report to work back in Germany. Everyone knew that if she were to return, that was ultimately a death sentence. But if she didn't go, they would also come looking for her. So Anne and her family packed up some clothes and walked an hour across town to take up hiding in a building behind her father's work. The hiding place has 2 stories and an attic. Anne and her family live on the bottom floor. Anne and Margot have their own room, and Otto and Edith have theirs. The second floor is occupied by another family, and the second floor also houses the kitchen for both families. And the attic is used for storage. They aren't allowed to look out the windows or go outside at all. They hang curtains in all the windows, and they were to always remain closed. Word finally makes its way to the Netherlands that the Nazis are ordered to get all the Jews out of the country by July 1st, 1943. In secret, the Nazis are ordered to kill as many Jews as they can. From Anne's room at night, she can hear the Allied forces' aircraft overhead, trying to do everything they can to stop the German Nazi progression. The Allied forces were extremely powerful, but slow. Anne and her family would listen to the radio updates any chance that they could, hoping for good news that the Nazis were overtaken. Anne even wrote in her diary that she had a feeling friends were approaching. While the Allied forces were attacking in Paris, someone phoned the German forces in Amsterdam, telling them that there are Jews hiding at the address where Anne and her family were hiding. They broke down the door and made their way into the annex, and that's where they took Anne and her family as prisoners. Not all were found and arrested in the house, however. Miep, who was living above, finds Anne's diary and decides to hold on to it, to keep it safe for when Anne returns. After Anne's arrest, she is moved from one concentration camp to another. On one particular trip to a camp, it took 3 days. Anne had to survive the whole journey without food or water. At the end of the 3-day train ride, she arrived at Auschwitz, a concentration camp in Poland. After being there for a month, she is then transferred to Bergen-Belsen camp. Anne survives there for only 5 months before succumbing to a cold, sickness, hunger, and exhaustion in March of 1945. And sadly, it was only 2 weeks later that the British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen. But by that time, there are more people dead there than there are living. Margot, Anne's sister, died days before at the same camp from typhus. Anne's mother, Edith, dies from hunger and exhaustion at Auschwitz. Only Anne's father, Otto, would survive. Of the 107,000 Dutch Jews sent to concentration camps, only 5,000 survived. In May of 1945, the Germans finally surrendered, and the Nazis were defeated. After Anne's father returns to the Netherlands, he finds out what really happened to his family, tragically. At which time, Miep hands him Anne's diary. He finds everything that she has ever written, including her dream of turning her diary into a book. And her father, Otto, carries out her dream. He gathered all the notes that she had ever published in her diary. Today, Anne's diary has sold over 30 million copies, and the family's hiding place in Amsterdam is now a museum that is visited by 1 million people each and every year. Anne Frank was wise beyond her years. She understood values and sense of purpose, no matter affiliation or religious background. She was proud to be who she was, up until the time that she gave her last breath. Today, we as Americans seem to go with the flow so we don't have to face opposition or pushback. Being original and owning who you are is exactly what you were created and meant to do. When we wander from this premise, we must remind ourselves, if Anne and her family would have conformed and renounced their ideals and principles, they could have very well lived a full life. But they chose to remain true to themselves, regardless of the consequences. Samuel Langhorne Clemens was born November 30th, 1835 in the village of Florida, Missouri. People today know the great storyteller as Mark Twain. Twain has always been able to capture an audience and take them for a great adventure. He was able to portray human behavior in a fascinating way. Much of Twain's vibrant imagination simply came from observations of everyday life, and many of those observations were observed in a town called Hannibal on the banks of the Mississippi River. And this is where this week's Heroes in History begins. Clemens was 11 years old when his father passed away. His father was the sole wage earner of the family, so without his weekly checks coming in, it would render Twain and his family helpless. So he went to work. He took on all sorts of different jobs like store clerk, delivery boy. He also began work as an apprentice and a compositor with the local printers and would contribute to small pieces in the local newspaper. From a very young age, Clemens loved to illustrate, and when he was 17, one of his comic sketches was published by a sportsman's magazine in Boston. Beginning in 1853, Clemens began traveling as a journeyman printer. He went to places like St. Louis, Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. To say Clemens carried a few jobs is, well, an understatement. It seems as though he tried his hand in just about every career field imaginable. From sales clerk, printer, illustrator, steamboat pilot, running timber mills, and silver mining. But at the end of the day, there was nothing better to him than putting pen to paper. Clemens eventually moved to California, and while there he adopted the name that we all know today, Mark Twain. The name derived from a riverman's term for water that's just safe enough for navigation. In 1865, Twain took a job with the Sacramento Union newspaper, and eventually he was working for Alta, California. His job was to travel all over and write about what he encountered, a dream job that many envied. In 1870, Twain took up part ownership and became a contributing editor to the Buffalo Express in New York. And while in New York, that's where he met his bride, Olivia Langdon. He and Olivia then moved to Hartford, Connecticut, where they would remain for 23 years, and they had 3 daughters together. Writing and editorial work was never in short supply for Twain. Newspapers and journals from all over the world were reaching out. They knew how well-rounded he was in travel and, well, just life in general. Mark Twain's creativeness and vibrant depictions all come from experiences he's come across in his personal life. Like his article entitled Life on the Mississippi, he was able to capture the beauty of what he saw as a steamboat pilot. He had a way of making the reader feel as though they were there too. He made you see the beauty he saw, experience the danger that he went through, and grasp the surreal feeling that you were actually thrusted into being one of the characters in one of his stories. Mark Twain lived out his boyhood memories with stories such as The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Readers young and old would be sucked into the adventure. Schools across the country started circulating it, and thousands of book reports were turned in. Twain was able to show triumph like never before, in pain that seemed at the time to grab you from within the pages. Mark Twain went on to publish many stories, each and every one relating somehow to a personal experience. Unfortunately, as Twain grew older, the reflections of simpler times started to fade. Some of the views he carried up until his death in 1910 left many puzzled and confused, such as his bizarre stance on religion and political worldviews. But Twain is a hero in history from what he brought to life on paper. making characters and illustrations that relate to us all in a personal way. Painting pictures that brought us into the story. Some would just simply plaster words on paper, but Twain created adventures and journeys that it leaped out of the pages and played out in front of us all to enjoy. Well, that does it for us here this evening on the Liberty Root podcast. I hope it was relaxing for you guys this evening, where you could just sit back and listen through our top 5 most popular heroes in history this week. I look forward to coming back with the full podcast. It'll be January 31st, 2018, because next week I will be out of town. So January 31st of 2018, we will be back in better than ever. I want to thank you guys for listening this evening. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And until next time, as always, live life, restore liberty, and pursue happiness. Have a great night, everyone.
This has been a Liberty Root production.